Welcome back to Sleep4 Performance Radio. Today I am joined by Associate Professor Sean Cain from Monash University. Today we're going to be talking about sleep, circadian rhythms and the impact of people's lives. This was an awesome conversation. I really enjoyed this. I could have spoken to Sean all day. Maybe it would have been better facilitated around 2 cigars and 2 cups of tea. But it was a really interesting chat. So if you have an interest in circadian physiology, circadian biology, and the effect on humans and behavior and mood and shift work, exercise and more, this is a great episode to listen to. Sean can be followed on Twitter at Circadian247, and we'll put up links to his profile, LinkedIn, and so on, all on the show notes as well. Hope you enjoyed this episode. I really did. Now we'll get into some ads and then we'll be straight into the episode.
Exercise and diet are well established in society as 2 pillars for optimizing our health. However, both are supported by a foundation that is often forgotten, yet even more integral to our health, namely sleep. The Sleep Recovery Specialist course is an innovative online education experience that provides an in-depth knowledge base, important sleep assessment tools, and a wide range of effective strategies for supporting clients to improve their sleep habits and behaviors. Improve your sense of happiness and well-being, daily energy and alertness, recovery from physical training, reduce risk of obesity and diabetes, and reduce your appetite and sweet cravings. Achieve all of this and more. For further information and to enroll online, please visit www.nordicfitnesseducationblog.com.
Hey everyone, this is Dr. Mark Bubbs, and I'm excited to announce my new book, Peak, The New Science of Athletic Performance That is Revolutionizing Sports, is available for pre-order right now on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Chapters Indigo, and local booksellers before its release on May 24th. Peak is a groundbreaking book exploring the fundamentals of high performance, not the fads, the importance of consistency, not extreme effort, and the value of patience, not rapid transformation. Peak explores the leading experts, such as Dr. Ian Dudekin, who are influencing the top performers in sports on how to achieve world-class success. What are performance professionals saying about Peak? Dr. Rocco Monto, orthopedic surgeon, Team USA physician, and author of The Fountain, says, Peak is a masterpiece of nutritional science from one of the world's leading authorities of athletic health and performance. It's a fantastic resource that provides a roadmap to reaching true wellness. Kelly Olynyk, forward for the NBA's Miami Heat, says, a must-read for athletes and everyone alike. Peak is an immeasurable tool to becoming the best you can be. And Dr. Fergus Connolly, PhD, performance expert and author of Game Changer and 59 Lessons, says, Peak is one of the most impressive and detailed books on applied sports science ever published, a must-have for any practitioner in performance. Regardless if you're trying to improve your physique, propel your endurance performance, or improve your team's record, Peak is about being an expert in the fundamentals and assumes that while top athletes are born, they can also be made. Pick up your copy of Peak today.
Sean, good morning or good afternoon. Oh, it's still morning in your time in Melbourne. How are you?
Great, Ian. How are you?
Excellent. Thanks for joining us today on this wintry weather. It's freezing here in Western Australia at the ripe old temperature of 18 degrees Celsius, and we've had about 5 mils of rain, which feels like 400 feet here. But anyway, so yeah, what's
slightly more miserable here, but
Melbourne. If you don't like the weather, just hang on 5 minutes; it'll change again. So yeah, it's good. So Sean, thanks for joining us this morning. We know you're a busy man at Monash University, so we'll get straight into it. Sean, you don't sound like you're from Melbourne. So where did you grow up, and how did you make it to Melbourne?
Well, that's a good catch. I'm from Canada originally. So I grew up on the very east coast of Canada in New Brunswick. And when people ask me where I'm from in Australia and I say New Brunswick, they look at me a little funny. They've never heard of it. I did all of my training in Canada, did my undergraduate work in Montreal, my graduate work in Toronto, and then moved on to the United States after that.
And so what did you study for your undergraduate degree, Sean?
I studied psychology. So my undergraduate degree is psychology, basically neuroscience, behavioral neuroscience, and the same for my graduate work.
Graduate work as well. What's the difference, Sean, between, let's say, the field of neuroscience and psychology? How would you differentiate between those two fields?
Well, I'd say neuroscience is really, it's sort of a field within psychology. So, psychology is much more broad. But of course, you can study neuroscience from other fields as well. So it spans multiple fields. So, I've got friends who are really physics trained, and they're doing neuroscience. So it's there's some overlapping, some Venn diagram overlapping things there.
Yeah. Would you say that neuroscience is more probably scientific and more objective, as opposed to psychology, which can be, I wouldn't say it's less scientific, but can be very subjective in terms of people's self-reported feelings and their kind of frames of reference in the world?
Yeah, I think that's pretty fair to say. Neuroscience is usually more, measuring of objective things, and psychology necessarily sometimes is about someone's experiences, which are self-reported. It doesn't mean, it's not a valid scientific pursuit, but it's definitely not about, measuring exact quantities of things often.
Yeah. So, Sean, I find that from a lot of people from North America seem to come into the sleep field from psychology, particularly neuroscience as well. Is that kind of what pushed you down the sleep path, or did you have a certain passion? Did you pick on a project? Did you stumble on by accident? How did you kind of find the area of sleep?
Yeah, it's a good point, because in Canada, it kind of punches above its weight in neuroscience. So it's got a really strong neuroscience background. So a lot of undergraduates have an opportunity to do work in neuroscience labs, and it was by accident that I went into the sleep and circadian rhythms fields. I was more interested initially in learning, and I volunteered in a couple of labs, and one was doing neuroplasticity, and the other was doing circadian rhythms. And even though the plasticity learning lab was my primary lab, I ended up going in the other direction along circadian rhythms. I really liked it right away. I felt it was such a fundamental thing. It affects all other systems. It just seemed like a endless thing to be devoting yourself to.
And has that kind of continued on throughout your career, where you've had this kind of core area of looking at circadian rhythms, and you've built upon that as you've gone over the last 20 years, or have you diversified from that, or diverged from that path?
Not really. I've really focused ever since my undergrad. At that point where I kind of decided that rhythms was my way to go, and all of my graduate work was there. I've really been doing it ever since, but still that allows you to have a pretty broad range of studies. So if you look at what I'm doing, if you look at my list of papers, you'll see some pretty out there stuff, but it's all fundamentally generally related to circadian rhythms. It touches all aspects of health. So it's kind of endless. Our bodies are full of clocks. Almost every tissue in the body has self-sustaining circadian rhythms. So it's something you can study no matter what system you're interested in.
Yeah. Because you came into sleep and that path through psychology and neuroscience and then the circadian rhythms, a lot of people often ask me, how did I get into sleep? And it's because there's no undergraduate degree, there's no really postgraduate degree you can do. And most people do it at a PhD level in terms of research, or to get into it from different angles. What would you say is the best way, Sean, if somebody was sitting out there today and they were 19, 20 years of age and they wanted to study sleep, what would you say is the best route into, becoming a sleep scientist, sleep researcher?
Yeah, you're right. There's not an obvious path there, and a lot of people happen upon it. I think the best thing to do is to try to, if you're in a university, find researchers who are doing that work, and often you'll find many. Get that person who's doing something that appeals to you, and then offer your time to them. I run here at Monash an internship program. It's basically my experience, which was when I was an undergraduate in psychology, I found out, you can volunteer in labs. So I volunteered in a lab and realized that research was for me. So I would suggest to younger people who are looking to get some training, just do some volunteering in labs and see if it's for you.
Yeah. Do you think on the back of that then, Sean, do you think that do you think that universities should offer a kind of a pathway like physicists will do, undergrad in physics, and then they'll go through and do a postgrad or a PhD, for example? Do you think that would be good in sleep? Or do you think that one of the benefits we have from sleep is that people come from all angles, from neuroscience, sports science, even engineering, when we start looking at fatigue detection technologies, because we have such kind of an array of people coming into sleep science? Do you think that's a good thing? Or do you think it'd be better to have a structured pathway through?
Well, I think it's kind of working the way it is. It would be great to have more broad outreach, and I can see some benefits to having something focused. But I think it's working well the way it is. You've got people from all sorts of avenues coming in and working together. It's really multidisciplinary. Which can make it difficult to have a structured single program. Having said that, I offer a unit at Monash on sleep and circadian rhythms, where I try to focus some learning on the key areas in those areas of research.
Yeah. I think as a kind of a personal point for myself, I've crossed over from industry into sports and into general sleep research, and I find that it's really different when you go, let's say, to different journals for publication. So, for example, if you go to a sports science journal with actigraphy, you'll probably get it published. But if you don't have any self-reported data from the athlete, they won't actually like it. Whereas if you go to a sleep journal, self-reported data is near on useless, and you need kind of PSG data, and vice versa. If you go back to a sports journal with PSG data, polysomnography, they're like, well, why didn't you get actigraphy and ask people what was going on? So it's really, from a research point of view and publication, it can be very frustrating for those who span, who go across different kind of spans or different kind of disciplines, that there's no structure in terms of the agreed objective methodology for collecting sleep measures.
Yeah, it's kind of a problem in general in science, where people get siloed. So you're in your little area. So let's say you've got a lab and you do sleep deprivation research. If you report anything other than number of 500 millisecond lapses on a simple reaction time test, they can get up in arms. They get used to publishing what they're used to.
Yeah,
and often you can get some pushback when you're not sticking to it. But I would say just always try to do what you think is best, and there will be a home for it eventually.
Yeah, and I think I think if you cross different domains, it's about just pushing the learning and the knowledge slightly further. And even if that gets refuted in the future or gets proven wrong, well, we've still done something to move the needle. So yeah, I think it all helps.
Yeah, I just don't think in general it's a good idea to do something and take some measure just because other people are doing it and getting it published, and sometimes getting away with it. So a lot of times some measures are poor, and yeah, you can get it published because other people got it published, but that doesn't mean it's right. So everyone should be thinking about what they're measuring and trying to report the right thing, the goal of getting at the truth of something, rather than the goal of doing a measure that they know they can get published.
Yeah, I think we'll come back to that point when we discuss your most recent paper about the effect of light, because that's one of the things in that paper where there's some really good objective measures as opposed to subjective feelings. So I think we'll come back around to that. Yeah. But I did want to, looking through your history, Sean, over the last, you've been publishing since the 90s. And
1999, so not that. Not the early 90s.
Not the early 90s, yeah. Yeah, so by that stage then, I think shell suits, the tracksuits were gone, the fluoro colors were gone, ecstasy tablets were still around a little bit, but anyway.
Post-grunge.
Well, post-grunge, yeah. So anyway, so 1999, on the cusp, probably the year The Sopranos got released. I found it really interesting. I was doing a rerun of The Sopranos recently, and somebody said to me they never heard of The Sopranos, the show, where my jaw dropped, and I was like, you are missing out on life. And then they never heard of The Wire, and I was like, oh, wow. My God, are you in for a treat?
That was the first golden age of
Still my two favorite shows.
Yeah, me too.
Sean, in some of your earlier research, you did a lot of stuff, research involving hamsters. Why is hamsters used in sleep research? Like, what's the benefit of research in sleep in hamsters, and how does that apply to humans?
Yeah, it does seem odd. These little fluffy animals, they're nocturnal. But the reason they're a favorite animal in circadian rhythms research is that they have crazy accurate onsets of nighttime activity. If you put a hamster in the dark, let's say you watch it, its onset of activity at night, and then you drop it into the dark and let it, what we say, free run. So it keeps its own internal time with no light cycle telling it what time of day it is. You could basically predict a couple of months later, within a few minutes, when it would start running on a running wheel. It's just incredibly accurate. So that's why people study hamsters. It's a really, really sensitive, accurate system for studying circadian timing. But I also did a lot of work in rats as well, and mice. And in general, rats are useful for certain types of studies, like learning studies. They're quite clever animals. So if you're looking at effects of circadian rhythms on learning and memory, which I was doing, I sometimes studied rats. We studied mice because they're good genetic knockouts that you could get easily with mice. But hamsters, it was all about the beautiful accuracy of their circadian clock.
And so when you have these hamsters in the lab, how does that, or even rats, and you talk about, investigating the effects of sleep deprivation on learning, what would that look like? Because I'm sure people are going, you don't get a hamster or a rat to read a book or to do a test on an iPad. So how do you actually test learning in rats or hamsters?
Well, there's different ways. So we did a lot of context conditioning. So we would teach them to like one context and be neutral, meh, about another context. And then we could do manipulations of light cycles to see how that disrupts the ability to learn. I did a lot of work on this accidental finding of a phenomenon called a timestamp. So we found that the time of day that these animals learned something was stamped into the learning experience. And so they would expect that learning experience to recur in 24-hour fashion. So if you tested them 24 hours later, they were great. 30 hours later, 32 hours later, almost like they didn't remember anything. 40 hours later, the same. But then 48 hours later, they seem to remember again. So there's this stamp of time of day on learning. So we're studying that, context learning, spatial navigation, things like that. It's really easy with changing light cycles in these rodent models. You change the light cycle, you disrupt the clock, and you can see how that disrupts learning as well. So that's quite a popular thing that's done in circadian disruption and learning.
And is there any crossover or I suppose applicability then to humans in terms of that, like in terms of timestamps with learning? Is there a better time of day to learn, a day in the week or in a cycle that they're in, or time of the year with those light and dark cycles, or even the lack of light? Does any of that sort of stuff cross over into humans, and what could we take from that?
I would expect that it would, but it's not been studied. So I think when it comes to certain kinds of learning, it's likely that there will be a timestamp. I think it's probably a part of our natural history, because the important things we interact with in the world are themselves rhythmic as well. So, predators and prey themselves have 24-hour clocks, and they will tend to behave and hunt and do things at certain times of day. So I imagine that it's the case that, especially for things like spatial navigation or anything kind of based on the hippocampus, although I won't get too much into that, that we probably have an expectation for 24-hour rhythms in things recurring. So I think it could be useful, but I'm not sure. It's not been tested, and I do have some ideas for how it could potentially underlie some sleep disturbances, but again, we've yet to test it.
So in that same area, Sean, from the literature that you've seen and even from some of your ideas, is there a certain time of day that people may be better off, spending time studying or trying to acquire knowledge? Is there a certain time of day even that, listeners could take away, like from 9:30 to 10:30 in the morning would be the best time for peak cognition or for memory? Is there any of that sort of stuff that you even kind of anecdotally would have seen?
Not well. I wouldn't say that there's a time of day that's best for studying, and people have been looking at this for a long time, like what times of day are better for this or that type of cognition. But it's generally not that easy to answer. I think keeping to a regular schedule is good. Getting a lot of sleep is beneficial. I would just say in general, if someone's trying to optimize their cognition, regularity is probably the best thing they could do. Trying to do things at the same time of day. If you're going to learn something, try to stick to that schedule. Our bodies like patterns, and they operate best, it seems, when we're sticking to a pattern. Yeah.
Yeah, people don't often like routine in business or in life. They think it's boring, but from routine, you can actually get some great improvements because you can build upon that.
That's right, and I'm someone who in the past has kept pretty crazy non-routines, but I'm keeping these days. Over the past few years, I've been more vigilant, and I watch my light cycles closely. I try to stick to times. I'll take my melatonin at exactly the same time every night, etc. And I do find that it makes my waking day and my working life much more productive, and I'm much more creative in my thinking when I'm at my best cognitively, and I feel like I am when I keep to these boring schedules.
So has that transpired because you've turned 40, or is it because you have become a great scientist? You're kind of adherent to these rules.
There's always there's a battle there. You there's a little less leeway as you get a little older, and so you got to fight that with some good habits, I guess.
Yeah, because I know I was going to say, since I turned 40, I've been more and more diligent about going to bed. My Saturday night last week was going to bed at 8:10, and I was very excited about going to bed at 8:10.
Okay, but that happens with me too. I often look at my watch and say, well, it's 7:30. Is it too early to go to bed? I'd like to go to bed. Maybe I should.
Yeah. When I was quite saddened then as well, because I thought 20 years ago, I'd be just, having a shower, getting ready to go out at this time on a Saturday night. I wouldn't even be thinking about going out yet. So
absolutely.
Funny how life changes. Anyway, we all used to be cool.
Mm-hmm.
At the flip side of cognition, Sean, a lot of people want to look at or ask a question about, it's about physical performance or exercise. And I noticed in some of your earlier publications, you had a paper looking about exercise distributed across day and night does not alter circadian period in humans. Now, a lot of people will kind of, I suppose, come back and say, if I exercise really early in the morning, it really helps me. If I exercise at lunchtime, it really helps me. Other people then say, if I exercise really late at night, I can't sleep. Or other people will say, because I get up so early in the morning and exercise, I don't feel good. What did you kind of find when you looked at this exercise and different time of day and the effect on performance?
Well, that was a really long duration study where they were looking at 3 bouts of kind of intense exercise over the day. It's 45 minutes of exercise and a few times in the waking day. And it was done in, I think, if I remember correctly, it was 42-day study in the lab. So they were on 20-hour days, and it allows you to separate the underlying 24-hour rhythm from a 24-hour sleep-wake cycle. And we're interested to see if exercise changes that underlying period, because people had done animal research showing that that exercise can change period, and we found that it didn't. So, it was a null null result, but important in a way. I think we don't have to be concerned that that exercise is going to somehow fundamentally disrupt how our clocks are running kind of under the surface. Having said that, we do believe, and we're starting to do some work now in my lab on how exercise can influence how our bodies respond to light. So I'm doing a lot of work in the area of depression, and I'm interested in how the circadian system is involved in depression. In a lot of people with depression, they have kind of what we call a perpetual underlying jet lag almost. They have abnormal synchronization of their clocks. Last year, we published something showing that selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, which are basically the first line of defense as an antidepressant, they greatly increase how our circadian system responds to light. So that can have a couple of effects. One is that it allows people who have a low sensitivity to light potentially to synchronize better their clocks to the day. But also light has this acutely mood elevating effect, and we think that these SSRIs are allowing any ambient light around you to have more of a mood elevating effect. Now, I mention this now because we're interested in exercise essentially having a similar effect as an antidepressant on the circadian system. So when you're active and moving around, you'll be getting more serotonin input to the core clock at the base of the brain. That's what the SSRIs are doing as well. And so now with exercise, you can basically respond more to the light. So all the ambient light will elevate your mood. It will, because it increases the effect of light on your clock, it can allow you to synchronize better to the day. So I'm interested, we're pursuing that, and we're very interested in kind of getting at this circadian aspect of the antidepressant effects of exercise in the future.
Yeah, and some of that stuff has been, maybe not so much on the circadian clock, but there has been numerous studies shown like that for people undertaking aerobic exercise, 4 to 5 times a week outdoors for 30 minutes each time, that 80% of people have reduced the effects of kind of transient depression.
Yeah, exercise is a powerful antidepressant, and we think that there's a circadian mechanism for that.
Yeah. Pretty interesting. Obviously, you'll be familiar with Russell Foster's work. Russell and myself were speaking in the Pilbara, the northwest of Australia last week, and he was presenting some data on this. And I've seen Russell present this similar data previously, where he looked at not just in people with depression, but also in people with schizophrenia, those that are homeless, who are generally homeless because of mental health disorders as well. And it's quite interesting to watch the effect of sleep on people with mental health disorders. Or some of the interesting data that struck me was bipolar. People having, periods of, huge amount of wakefulness, which then, resulted in a kind of a blowout in terms of a manic episode, and then had to be hospitalized and so on. So it's very interesting.
Yeah, and we just published 2 weeks ago a paper showing that people with personality traits related to bipolar disorder are hypersensitive to light. We use this sustained pupil response to blue light. So you've got circadian photoreceptors in your eye that respond optimally to blue light. And they're quite interesting and different from visual photoreceptors in that once they turn on, they don't turn off very quickly. Because these photoreceptors are just trying to tell, is it day or is it night? So unlike visual photoreceptors, they don't turn on and off really quickly. And so we use that to look at how sensitive those circadian photoreceptors are to light by looking at how long and how much their pupils stay constricted in the dark after exposure to blue light. And we found that people who were basically had mania-like traits responded much more. So I think in general they have a circadian system that is much more responsive to light. Now that could be good in that it's mood elevating, and certainly a state of hypomania feels good. It's you feel productive, you feel energetic, and that might be part of why people stay up. So they stay up, they're exposed to light, and even relatively dim light for these people could basically keep them alert, keep them awake. Then you're having effects on your clock, which is pushing it around in time. I think this light sensitivity issue is important in that regard as well when it comes to bipolar, and Russell's data there, I think, could probably be explained quite a bit in this circadian light sensitivity context.
Yeah, no, it's very interesting, and I know even for myself, like personally, just the more exposure I get to daylight, if I travel a lot and I come home or I get to a new destination, just getting out into natural light, doing some exercise, moderate to high intensity, particularly aerobic exercise, makes me feel so good, helps me to synchronize that new time zone, helps me sleep that night as well, obviously probably because of the physical exertion, but basically just getting out into nature as well. There's something to it, I think, where you get out and get that natural light, especially when I don't wear sunglasses or a hat, and I just kind of get that like high exposure to natural light. For me, it definitely helps, and it's one of the big things for me is having as much natural light as possible. I've always found that, and from growing up in Ireland where you don't get a lot of it, I really found a difference in my mood since I moved to Australia, hence why I haven't gone back.
Yeah, so I think in general it's not a bad idea to avoid fighting against your natural history, and we spent our time outside, and our clocks evolved to get a strong onset of light and an offset of light, and that's what our bodies seem to like. But we spend most of our time indoors. 90% of our time indoors, and maybe we shouldn't.
No, for sure. On that same topic then about people spend their time indoors or basically being on disrupted schedules, you've also done some work, Sean, looking at night shift workers and I suppose their preference for fatty foods at the end of a night shift or during a night shift. Can you tell us a little bit about some of that work you've done?
Yeah, so I'm very interested in food and food choices, how food affects our sleep, and how sleep affects our food choices, and there's definitely a cycle there. We did this simulated night shift work where we had people basically pulling an all-nighter, and then they got to freely choose from a buffet what they wanted to eat. The interesting thing about that is it's within subject studies, so the people were kind of choosing from the same amount for the same food choices what they wanted, and they tended to pick higher fat food after pulling an all-nighter. And there's different ways to interpret that. You could say that they're making poorer food choices, and that's the common way of interpreting it. When you're sleep deprived, your prefrontal cortex is impacted. It stops you from being able to, make what we'd call good decisions, or at least makes it more difficult. And then they would choose maybe the fattier foods. We didn't find they had more carby foods, but fattier foods. But then another way of looking at it is maybe this is some kind of protective mechanism, and maybe fat helps us recover from sleep loss or when we're getting poor sleep. I would tend to think that now because I'm keto, and I find that my high-fat diet has resulted in some of the best sleep I've had as an adult. So we'll see. We still need to look into this to test it, but there is some evidence from it's about 10 years ago. I can't recall the reference, but showing that there's more slow wave sleep on a high-fat, low-carb diet than the other way around. So it might be the case that fat allows us to recover from sleep loss, or it's some kind of protective impulse as well.
Yeah.
More work needs to be done there.
I'm glad you said that, because I reached out to Dom D'Agostino a couple of years ago because he made some comments on some podcasts about, improved sleep on a ketogenic diet. And I tried to find out, and I looked for quite a while about what was the mechanism behind that, but it doesn't seem to be a reason behind that. And I'm not an expert in diet and nutrition, but I know that everybody reacts differently, that everybody tries different things, and maybe the keto is good for some but not for others, and it can't always be a one solution for everybody. So I'll be interested to see that. The reason I get interested in the diet and nutrition aspect is when I'm dealing with shift workers, because your study had a night of simulated, shift worker sleep, and which resulted in sleep loss for those choices. But we often deal with people who do 28 nights straight, So how does that affect it, because that's one night, but then if you're constantly consuming fatty food for 28 nights, we see with a lot of shift workers, increase in body weight. I was presenting some data recently in the oil and gas industry. Now, there's not that many papers published in oil and gas, but out of the papers I found, I think it was less than 5. If you look on average, the BMI of an oil and gas worker is between 27 and 41, and the average age is, in the mid-40s. And 97% male. So when you start looking at it from that perspective, then you look at the increased risk of obstructive sleep apnea. So whilst it might help from a protective mechanism about recovering from sleep, it may start leading to, further, sleep disorders, because as BMI goes up, we know in men, when BMI hits 31, nearly a 90% chance of developing obstructive sleep apnea. So it may help them recover from sleep, but then it may start getting disruption once they're kind of this tipping point of the BMI hits a certain point. And that's why I always get interested in the diet nutrition aspects of shift work.
Yeah, sure. But these kinds of protective mechanisms didn't evolve to deal with something like 29 days. So, we're short-circuiting, a system that it developed for dealing with reasonable challenges, not these ridiculous things that we impose on ourselves. So it might be protective, and then it's just completely out of whack because we're doing this massively unnatural thing.
Yeah, and that's like what Kenneth Wright's study and a few other authors there showed. I can't remember being on that paper, but recently they showed that, I think it was, sleep loss during the week and then trying to, catch up on the weekend. It was fine for kind of 1 week, you'll get away with it, but repeated weeks, like even the second week, I think people resulted in having being basically pre-diabetic and gain weight as well. So like you say, probably built to get away with it for a short term, one night or even some sleep loss over a week. But you keep doing that week on, week in, week out, and I get this argument from a lot of people in the industry, whether it be oil and gas, military, whatever it might be. Yeah, but we just get used to it and we adapt to it and we can manage it. It's like, well, not really.
Yeah, you don't. People think that because they get used to a new normal, and the new normal is feeling terrible. And you just cope with it. Most people live in this kind of state of being a little bit sleep deprived, and then they counter it with, caffeine or whatever drugs they want to take. But if you go out camping, or you just stick to the regular light dark cycle and you sleep what you need to sleep, you realize that you're not supposed to feel like that at all. You're supposed to feel pretty alert, pretty cognitively together, and that these things just that new normal is just abnormal. Yeah.
No, I totally agree. Yeah, people think that 28 nights is quite normal, and it's definitely not. Especially 28 nights of 12-hour shift. It's near on impossible in my opinion. So
yeah, no.
Anyway, people chase the money. So Sean, you also last year had a great article out about the sleep calculator, in terms of why it might be a terrible idea to be using sleep calculators or apps or trying to figure out when to wake up. Obviously, this was a piece that it was kind of in popular media around this, and we often get this question as well to the podcast. We often get this question in industry, sports people. Everybody kind of, the number one thing is, well, I've bought this app or I have this calculator and it's really helping me sleep. And I always say, is it really? Like, how do you know it's working? Whatever it might be. And my catch cry to everybody is sleep apps are shit, or sleep calculators are shit, really. To use a scientific term, which makes people laugh, but we start discussing them. So I'd be interested, Sean, to if you could let listeners know about what you found with sleep calculators and why you think they may be a bad idea.
Well, what I don't like, the reason I said it's a terrible idea, and which was in the title of that news story, which I do believe, the idea that you want to wake out of REM. That's fine. It's easier to wake out of REM sleep than non-REM. But to cut your sleep short because you think based on a 90-minute cycle that you're going to be in REM at this point, it's crazy to think that you're ever going to accurately time waking out of REM. And so the thing I didn't like is that you instead of sleeping a bit more, which in general is going to be the better idea, you would cut your sleep short, let's say by a half an hour, because you think based on a 90-minute cycle and whatever time you fall asleep, like who knows if you fall asleep when you think you're going to fall asleep. But based on that, you cut your sleep short to wake out of REM. I think that's a bad idea. It's in general going to be the worst thing that you could do. Just let yourself sleep a little bit more. That's going to be better than trying to hack your sleep and wake out of REM.
So, Sean, you believe that people from your work that people should basically naturally wake up when sleep debt has been recovered, that the internal kind of mechanism will drive people to sleep for what's needed, and unless they have some crazy sleep disorder, which would be very, very few people, probably less than 1% or even less again of people that might sleep too long. So most people, 99.9% of people, are going to sleep until basically sleep debt has been recovered, and then they will naturally wake up.
Yeah, that just seems to be the better way of doing things, rather than cut your sleep short on the off chance that this calculator is going to be able to help you wake out of REM. It's just get a little more sleep. That seems to be the better idea. But a lot of people making apps or giving advice, they don't necessarily know what they're talking about.
Oh, 100%. And Sean and I were talking about this before the podcast started, that marketing is basically killing science. I think, there are so many good sleep scientists in the world who are doing really good work, validating technologies, taking objective measures, and then some device comes out on the market with great marketing, but has no validity behind it, and people flock to it and then have 110% faith in that device. And then when they talk to an expert, they start arguing with them. So that's why I just don't entertain the arguments anymore. I just go, look, if you believe that device works X, Y, and Z, just keep going for it. You paid the money, so you believe in it. Don't ask me, And I'm sure you get that same thing as well, Sean, where people want to argue with you about the validity of a sleep app or a new type of wrist-worn device or some headband they're wearing, because it said on an ad, it measures sleep and eliminates fatigue.
Right. I mean, people they generally assume that if something got on the market, that it's been tested, but it's, just look at the supplement industry. You've got supplements that'll make all sorts of claims, but they do often little more than make your urine expensive. So it's a difficult thing to fight against. You just have to keep doing your good research and making better products, hopefully.
Yeah. So, Sean, the last area I want to talk about this morning before you head off to do some more research on hamsters this morning is your recent
My hamster days are over.
I just imagine you walking around Monash campus with like 20 hamsters on little leashes, bringing them for a walk mid-morning while you're getting your coffee.
Look, I wish I was doing that.
So your recent paper that came out from yourself, Andrew Phillips, and a numerous cast there of well-to-do authors, including our good friend Claire, who's on holidays at the moment, is the high sensitivity and inter-individual variability in the response of the human circadian system to evening and light. Now, this paper came to my attention on Twitter, because obviously, as you know, it's very hard to keep up with lots of papers. But one of the reasons I came across this paper was a lady called Olivia Walsh made some great little comics summarizing your papers. And I've reached out to Olivia to see if she can probably do some work for us, but she's so busy at the moment. But she had some great little comic book infographics that hopefully we can put into the show notes, showing your work, which I think is a great way to get it out to the general masses. But really this paper was looking at the effect of lighting levels before sleep and how people had different sensitivity to it. And obviously, a lot of people talk about electronic devices, blue light. Does it really affect sleep onset latency? Myself and Russell had this conversation a few weeks ago, and I've got my own criticism of some of the papers out there because some show a statistical effect on sleep onset latency, but is it clinically relevant? For example, a delay of 5 or 10 minutes for sleep onset latency, is that really an effect? In some of my own research looking at athletes, we found no effect of electronic devices on sleep. And then another paper I worked on with Madison Jones in the laboratory found no effect basically on melatonin, cortisol, or even next day performance, whether it had different types of light exposure the night before in terms of reading off a Kindle or an iPad or off a magazine. So it's quite interesting in your study you found this inter-individual variability in the response to the human circadian system. So can you talk us through, Sean, kind of the background of that paper and how you measured it?
Sure. I mean, you've got about 10 things that I want to comment on there. The background. This is a study that was funded here in Australia by the NHMRC, and it took several years to run. It was just it was such a big study to run. Our pet name for the study was Super Mega. It was just massive. So we brought, in the end, we had data from 55 people in that paper, and they came in over 6 or 7 weeks and were exposed to multiple different light levels. So we essentially, for an individual, had a full dose response curve to light. And so we were able to very sensitively measure each individual's light sensitivity as measured with melatonin suppression. So one of the big findings was that there was a 50 to 60-fold difference between individuals. So there is no one size fits all for people. It was a massive difference. So some people had 50% of their melatonin suppressed at under 10 lux. So 10 lux of light would be less than almost anyone has in their home. But on average, people actually had 50% of their melatonin suppressed at under 30 lux, which is about what you'd get off of a phone or a bedside lamp. So I think it's happening to most people that they're getting quite a bit of melatonin suppressed in the evening. It's just that people are quite different one to the other. Now, as far as your point about sleep onset and whether whether these devices alter sleep onset, I think measuring sleep onset is tricky because a lot of people study it in the athletes of sleep, the super young people. Like a few years ago, Anne-Marie Chang at Harvard Medical School published something where they had people looking at iPads before bed. They were getting something like 40, 50 lux. They did have suppression. They had a delay of the clock. They had a sleep onset latency delay. I think in that case it was around 10 minutes. And then they had poor functioning on the next day. Now these people, yes, 10 minutes doesn't sound like much. Is it clinically relevant? But these people were massively screened. They had no sleep disorders. They were young. I think they were in their early 20s on average. These people can sleep very, very easily. This is why, when you're in your 20s and you go out drinking, you can go out drinking the next night as well, because you can actually recover some of your sleep. And we, Ian, at our age, maybe we're not doing that so much anymore. So when you're studying like the sleep athletes, the elite sleepers, then a 10-minute sleep onset latency difference is quite significant. And if you're looking at the effects of drugs that induce sleep, that's not far off what the average change in latency is for drugs that are multi-billion-dollar industry. So I wouldn't. I do hear people say, well, is it clinically relevant? But I think you got to look at the population. If you've got really super healthy sleepers who also probably live under a certain amount of sleep debt in general, then small changes in sleep onset latency can be significant. Now, that's sleep. We're not just affecting sleep. These devices, this light, sleep is a small part of what I care about on the effects of light. It's really the effects on the circadian system. So even if you can't measure some effect on sleep, you're still affecting the circadian system. And what I show is that this light is having a massive impact on melatonin suppression, even at low levels in general. Now, that could affect your sleep, maybe not. Who knows about your sleep background and whether that's a measurable thing. What you're also doing is affecting your internal clock's time. You're tricking it into thinking it's day when it's night. You're disrupting rhythms throughout your body. You've got clocks in your heart and your liver, and everywhere in your body, your pancreas. When you disrupt and give a bad signal for day or night with these devices and light at night, you're doing lots of other things other than impacting sleep. Sleep is just one of the things that you can see an effect in. There's dozens of other systems that could be negatively affected. It's not all about sleep.
Yeah, that's a great point. I really like that, Sean, is because you might positively affect something or negatively affect one thing. And, you're looking at the kind of first line of defense or the first impact, but what's all the other things that happen after that as well? That's really interesting. I think your point about the, I suppose, let's say the resilience due to age in terms of sleep debt is very interesting. I know myself, when I was younger, when I was in the military, you could really kind of bounce back really quick from sleep loss, either on the weekend from going out having a few drinks or due to sleep loss in infantry sort of tactics. With your group, you had 55, like you said, people aged between 18 and 30. Did you find any effect of the age across that group? Or
not across that group, but we really had mostly the early 20s, so it wasn't that much spread, and we did that for a reason. We were within a tight group of healthy people. What kind of variation is there? So if we find a 50 to 60-fold variation within this tight age group, who have no sleep disorders or anything like that, imagine what it is out in the world where people are different by age. And we know there's a big effect of age on light sensitivity, effects of light on the clock. Now we know from my study last year, which is the first study done in humans to show an effect of drugs on increasing the response to light. Imagine all the drugs that we don't even know haven't had an effect on the circadian system yet. So the variation out in the real world is probably many times more than that. And
so for anybody at home, Sean, sitting there going, wonder what my kind of sensitivity is to light. Is there any which way they might be able to do this at home themselves? Do they need to shine a torch in their eye, burn a candle in their ear? Is there any which way they can figure out their own sensitivity?
Yeah, not yet, but soon. Watch this.
But soon.
Because, I'm involved in the creation of some tests and wearables that will be able to get at that. So, it's maybe a year or two away. Let's say a year. Bring me back on in a year, and then I'll spruik that stuff.
Oh, that's a great way to probably finish up today's podcast, and also a great way to keep people hanging for a follow-up in 12 months. Professor Sean Cain, it's been a pleasure, interesting talk. Really enjoyed it, and I want to thank you for your time today.
Great, thanks.
It was very good. So, Sean, for anybody who's listening and wants to follow your work, is there any sort of social media handles that people can follow you on? Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, any other thing you're on?
Yeah, look, I'd appreciate. I could use some more Twitter followers. So I'm at Circadian247 on Twitter. I am on LinkedIn if people want to approach me there.
Okay, excellent. We will put that information in the show notes. We'll also put a nice pretty picture of Sean in there so you can see his beautiful ketogenic face. Now that he's glowing and healthy, sporting a new trim beard. That's great. So we'll put that all up onto the show notes. So once again, Sean, thank you very much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much for having me.
So that was Associate Professor Sean Cain. Once again, thank you, Sean, for making some time available. Really appreciate it. Looking forward to having you back on in 12 months to discuss some of this work in terms of identifying people's sensitivity to light cycles and how that suppresses melatonin. Definitely interested in having a look at this. I'm keen to figure out my own light suppression issues that I may have, because I do enjoy to read a book before bed, and I've been known to watch a scary show before sleep as well. Anyway, we will leave it there for this month. Thank you very much, Sean, and thank you very much for everybody who's been tuned into the podcast. If you'd like to leave a review on iTunes, please do so, and please feel free, sleep deprived, to share this episode to as many people as you wish. It is free. Please make it available. Until next month, sleep well.